Town Council meeting where we're going to take care of a few items so that we can get moving before our next meeting, which is scheduled for March 6th. We will open our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before I ask our town clerk, Sheila Bailey, to do the roll call, I'd just like to mention that town council member Nick Hopkins is absent tonight because he's still in Australia. Sheila, roll call.
Deputy Mayor Sakala. Here. Mayor Crissati.
Here.
Councilor Despard.
Here.
Councilor Finger.
Here.
Councilor Hopkins is absent. Councilor Ludwig is absent. Councilor Mangini.
Here.
Councilor Nelson.
Here.
Councilor Pisner.
Here.
Councilor Santinella.
Here.
And Councilor Ungary.
Here.
9 members are present and 2 are absent.
Item number 2, discussion resolution, the approval of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and establishment of the terms of members. This is the final document that the committee will use as its guide. And I'd like to thank all the council members who sent in suggestions and the deputy mayor who tracked all the changes and created the final comment. Second, as part of this resolution, we need to establish the terms of appointments for this, and it was in the previous packet and also in our packet that we should have right in front of us for the 3-year terms and the 2-year terms. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Motion by Deputy Mayor Sakala and a second by Councilor Mangini. Any discussion?
I just want to
Councilor
say,
Pisner.
I just wanted to say, moving forward with this, I am going to support this. I do still have some reservations, although most of my concerns have been taken care of, and I'm appreciative of that. But I will be supporting this tonight. Again, I still have a few reservations. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Councilor Finger.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor. I'm the same as Councilor Pisner. I'm going to be voting yes, but I do have issues, especially about the budget that they're going to be receiving. There's no numbers, what the max is. I know it's still in an early stage, but seeing numbers would have been kind of nice to see maybe what they were expecting or whatever this committee would have been looking for. But I will support it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilor Mangini.
I just want to echo Mayor Crissati's thank you to our Deputy Mayor, Gina Casala, for doing a fine job, taking in all the suggestions and very carefully and craftily putting them into order and putting them in a form that we can all vote on and be appreciative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Ungary.
I just wanted to say that I'm not going to be supporting this. There's too many open ends. In the description, it talks about institutions. They don't say what institutions. They say systems. They don't say what systems that they want to be involved in. They want to be involved in making decisions and the whole process. They want access to policy, procedures, training, and our town charter. And so I don't know any other committee that has direct access to our town charter except that committee. So there's too many open ends, and I can't support it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Sheila, roll call.
Deputy Mayor Sakala.
4.
Mayor Crissati.
4.
Councilor Despard.
4.
Councilor Finger.
4.
Councilor Mangini.
4.
Councilor Nelson.
Against.
Councilor Pisner.
4.
Councilor Santinella.
4.
Councilor Ungary.
Against?
That's 7 in favor, 2 against, no abstentions.
Okay, thank you. And finally, right now, I would like to name the town council liaisons for this committee, and they will be Councilors Marie Pisner, thank you, Marie, and Councilor Cindy Mangini will act as our town council liaisons to this group, and they have volunteered their service for that, so thank you very much. Item number 3 is the transmittal of the proposed senior tax relief program. The final report from the Senior Tax Relief Committee is being received by us here tonight, and there's no action needed, but we ask all of you to read it, and we'll be visiting this on March 6th. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can send them to the town manager or myself. All right, but this was a committee that was formed. We've been working on it the past few months, and it's a good document. I think a lot of people will be happy with it. All right, the last item that I'd like to discuss is the discussion resolution to authorize the town manager to enter into an agreement with Civic Plus for the addition of the civic clerk and to take any action as necessary. We had this at the last meeting, and in order to preserve the pricing before it increases, we went ahead and placed it on tonight's agenda in the hope that the council will support it since there is no budget impact. Is there a motion?
So moved.
We'll go with Councilor Nelson and a second by Deputy Mayor Sakala. Any discussion on this? I know that we had talked about it at our last meeting. I think we're good. Sheila, roll call.
Deputy Mayor Sakala. 4. Mayor Crisati.
4.
Councilor Despard.
4.
Councilor Finger.
4.
Councilor Mangini.
4.
Councilor Nelson.
4.
Councilor Pisner.
4.
Councilor Santinella.
4.
Councilor Ungary.
4.
9 in favor, none against, and no abstentions.
That concludes our special meeting. Is there a motion to
Motion.
adjourn?
Second.
Councilor Mangini and a second by Councilor Nelson. All in favor? Unanimous. We are now adjourned, and we will start the public hearing. We're right on for 6 o'clock, so we'll start it in less than 10 minutes. So we'll adjourn for 10. Thank you. And welcome to tonight's meeting. The legal notice for tonight was published and reads, the Enfield Town Council will hold a public hearing on Monday, February 13th, 2023 at 6 p.m. in the John F. Kennedy Middle School Auditorium, 155 Raffia Road in Enfield, Connecticut, to allow public comment on the draft of the Plan of Conservation and Development received from the Planning and Zoning Commission. There was a sign-up sheet for those who would like to speak when you came in. If you have not signed up yet, please do so now. We will be allotting 3 minutes per speaker, and then if you need to come up again, you'll be allowed to do so. Tonight, we are here to listen to you. The format will be that we will hear a brief presentation to give everyone an overview, and then we will open up to hear people's comments. The town council, if they choose so, they will have the opportunity to comment. At this point in time, I would like to introduce our town manager, Ellen Zapusasu. There you are. Okay, welcome.
And if the town council members want to see the presentation, they can go into the front row. But before we start, I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview as to why we are here. The Plan of Conservation and Development that has been drafted is a 51-page document at this point. But more importantly is why it's required. Public Act number 15-95 mandates that every municipality create a municipal plan of conservation and development and update it every 10 years. So this is the document that I brought, and I want to just spend a quick minute talking about the language. Most of the language includes the word shall, which is a mandate from the state government to municipal government. The first section reads, at least once every 10 years, the Commission shall prepare or amend and shall adopt a plan of conservation and development for the municipality. The next section says, in preparation of such plan, the Commission may appoint one or more special committees to develop and make recommendations for the plan, and Enfield did have a steering committee. Subsection D, in preparing such plan, the Commission or any special committee shall consider the following. Again, shall consider the following. And there is a subsection of multiple conceptual ideas that must be included in every municipality's plan of conservation and development. One of them is that it must consider the need for affordable housing. It must consider the use of cluster development and other developmental patterns to the extent consistent with soil types, terrain, and infrastructure. It shall consider the state plan of conservation and development, the regional plan of conservation and development, as well as physical, social, economic, and governmental conditions and trends. It also must consider the needs of the municipality, including but not limited to human resources, education, health, housing, recreation, social services, public utilities, public protection, transportation, and circulation. Subsection E discusses that such plan of conservation and development shall be a statement of policies, goals, and standards for the physical and economic development of the municipality. This is a guidance document. Another portion, subsection E of that, says that it is to recommend the most desirable density of population in the several parts of the municipality. The plan must also make provision for the development of housing opportunities, including opportunities for multifamily dwellings consistent with soil types, terrain, etc. It must also promote housing choice and economic diversity in housing, including housing for both low and moderate income households, and encourage the development of housing which will meet the housing needs identified in the state's consolidated plan for housing and community development. This public act goes on to spell out additional parts of the process. We're going to make this available for people to reference, but as you can see, it is a very complex mix of issues that has to be addressed within the Plan of Conservation and Development, and one that has been in process for the last few years. In doing so, most communities will rely upon a consultant to help guide that process.
And that is what Enfield did. So tonight, with us to do the presentation, to provide everybody with an overview, is Donald Poland. He is the Senior Vice President and Managing Director of Planning and Strategy for Goldman & York. He has over 27 years of experience in land use planning, real estate development, housing, economic development, and neighborhood investment. He's worked in both the public and private sectors as well as for a nonprofit and also academia. Dr. Poland offers a very unique perspective, and I think is one of the reasons that Enfield probably retained him, which was before my time, in terms of all of the complexities that I just outlined to you. He is also a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. He is a certified zoning enforcement official. He is past president of the Connecticut chapter of the American Planning Association and a fellow with the Connecticut Policy Institute. So what I found most interesting about his bio, with all of the things that he must manage, he also earned his PhD from the University College London, Department of Geography, and his doctoral research focused on urban ecology and ecological resilience, which obviously is one of the main issues that I've been hearing in my office from a lot of residents. Also with us tonight is our town planner, Lori Witten, who you will be hearing from later, who will be spelling out the work of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the process, and where we stand now, and what happens over the next several weeks. So with no further ado, I'd like to cede the floor to Dr. Poland so that he can provide everyone in attendance tonight with an overview of where we are and how we got here. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind introduction. So, for the record, Don Poland, Goldman York Property Advisors. I'm here tonight to give a presentation of the Plan of Conservation Development, or the draft plan. Lori, next slide, please. This will be a general overview. I'm going to quickly touch on a few things that were just discussed about process, then the planning process for the creation of this plan, and then I'm going to go through the organization, the thematic chapters, and the target investment areas that are contemplated within the draft plan. Included in that, in those thematic chapters, is the chapter on housing, but I also recognize there's some specific concerns related to housing, so I'm going to spend a little more time on housing at the end of the presentation. Next slide. And next one. So the POCD is a statement of policies, goals, and standards of the physical, economic, and economic development of the municipality. It is the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendations for the use of land, the most desirable use of land throughout the community. As was already stated, it is a policy guide, it is a recommendation, it is non-binding. The Commission must consider it when making certain decisions, but they are not bound to it. They can actually decide indifference to it moving forward. And it is designed to promote and coordinate development of the municipality and general welfare and prosperity. Next slide. The general process that we used in creating this plan is to evaluate physical, demographic, socioeconomic, and environmental trends within the municipality to ultimately determine what is most important to the community. Then it's kind of this layered approach of first identifying those things that are to be protected and conserved. Once you know what you're going to protect, then you can make decisions about what you're going to develop, residential, commercial, industrial, and so on. And then once you know what you're developing and also what you're protecting, you can start to determine density, intensity, and then ultimately the infrastructure, public infrastructure that's needed to support the development, including community facilities. Next slide. Using the concept of sustainable development, I want to make a key point here. There is a tendency once POCDs are adopted, and I'm guilty of it myself when representing applicants, is the idea of kind of cherry picking a plan to find the statements that support whatever it is you want to do or not want to do. And I always think it's important to make clear that the definition of sustainable development, the last sentence states that doing so must integrate and balance economic, environmental, and social goals. With the POCD, just because one section of the POCD may say, if you can go back to that slide.
Sorry about that.
Just because one section of the plan may say protect this, That doesn't necessarily mean that that's at the exclusion of, say, economic and social goals, or vice versa. If it says develop this, that doesn't necessarily mean it's at the exclusion of the environmental goals. The fact is we need to find that balance, strike that balance, and let's say it's a development encroaching into a sensitive natural area, then how do you mitigate the impacts to the natural environment? So I really want to emphasize the idea of balance. Next. Next slide. This committee, the steering committee, was established approximately 2 years ago. It met almost monthly up until, I believe, last September. I believe over that period of time, only 2 or 3 months were missed, so there were regular monthly public meetings with the steering committee. There was a virtual kickoff in April of 21, community survey in the spring of 21, department head interviews in the fall of 21, a community facility survey in the spring of 2020, and then public outreach meeting in person in April of 22, and the Thompsonville outreach program, which was in August of 22. Over the course of time, a number of reports and presentations were issued in which the committee was presented with topics, was presented with potential policy recommendations, and discussions were engaged in. Next slide. Next. This is just an overview of the chapter structure. I'm not going to go through it. Next slide. So the thematic recommendations, all of these pages have a lot of information on them. I am not reading them to you verbatim, nor am I going to focus on each and every one of the items. I want you to see kind of the number of in-kind of recommendations that are being made within each of the thematic sections. So the first thematic section of the document deals with this idea of the cultural landscape. It's kind of the core values of the community, especially in the natural setting. So things like historic districts, scenic resources, the Connecticut and Scantic River, agriculture and land preservation, all come into play within this section, and ultimately specific recommendations on enhancing those qualities within the community. Next slide. The plan then goes into a lengthy section on natural resources. And it's lengthy because there's so many different topics to be covered in this area. So it starts with a section on floodplain regulations with recommendations like acquiring flood-prone property, or updating the flood maps through a more detailed study, which is a process you can engage in with FEMA to make sure you have the most accurate and up-to-date mapping. The second section focused specifically on inland wetlands and watercourse, and we had substantial input, I believe, from the Inland Wetlands Commission on this. Creating public awareness about the importance, a guidebook to wetlands, updating the wetlands map, creating a more detailed wetlands map, identifying and ranking wetlands by quality. In the world of wetlands, there are some that are very high quality and there are some that are very poor quality. How you're going to approach them from a preservation perspective may differ. Next slide. There was then a section on aquifer protection, stormwater management, and ultimately development in sensitive areas. And all three of these, focusing in on additional environmental quality issues. Next slide. And then, I believe this is the last slide in natural resources, open space conservation, and then agricultural conservation and preservation. Things like expanding the Public Act 490, the taxing policy around agriculture and open space land uses, or increasing the number and location of community gardens is another recommendation, creating a farm-friendly zoning regulation, and encouraging agritourism as another example of a recommendation within the plan. Next slide. Oh, I still have another slide here. I knew I couldn't get away from it. So then confronting climate change, community facilities and capital improvements is a way of looking at that. Zoning regulations, consideration of tax abatements and energy efficiency programs, Tree preservation was another area of strategies, becoming recognized as a tree city, encouraging planting of native trees and implementing a tree planting program. And then the adoption of the CROG, the Capital Region Council of Governments Natural Hazards Action Plan. CROG did a regional action plan with specific municipal plans for each of the communities within its region. So we reviewed and ultimately utilized this plan within the POCD. Next slide. Residential. I'll go through each of these briefly, and then as I said, I'm going to come back to housing at the end. But housing need and affordable housing plan. Encourage and provide diversity of housing types, tenure, and affordability to all incomes. Allow multifamily in the BR, BP, and I1 zones. Other multifamily strategies such as reducing parking requirements, allowing mixed-use developments in the BR and BP zoning districts, creating a permitting process that is swift, simple, and certain, utilizing tax abatements to encourage housing as part of redevelopment projects, not in and of themselves, but as part of redevelopment projects, establishing a housing trust fund, which is essentially a statutory authorized program where you can actually capture funds into a specific dedicated fund to be used for housing, and creating inclusionary zoning provisions. Next slide. Also creating, that duplicated over. Creating a inclusionary zoning provision, a small lot open space subdivision or a cluster development recommendation, addressing non-conforming subdivisions, creating a affordable housing committee to oversee implementation of kind of public outreach and so forth and education around that, promoting transit-oriented development in relationship to the train station in Thompsonville, and then some specific related to 8-30J affordable housing plan, which I'll discuss a bit later at the end of this presentation. Continue to sponsor and expand first-time homebuyer programs, allow accessory dwelling units, work with nonprofits and for-profit developers, and also to explore other opportunities for mid-density missing middle housing. Next slide. So after the housing component, then looking at economic development, recognizing some of the challenges confronting Enfield with commercial development, trying to remove barriers to investment through the zoning process, encouraging and allowing greater density and diversity of land uses, providing incentives to overcome high cost of redevelopment. I just want to pause on this for a second. Redeveloping something like the mall becomes much more costly than building on a greenfield. You have environmental remediation things like addressing lead paint, asbestos, and also demolition of potentially portions of the structure. Those are all upfront costs that even come before the cost of development, therefore recognizing possible need for public participation and incentives. Streamlining the land use application process and with a recommendation for a specific approach, and creating a well-defined economic development program. Next slide. So, having gone through the conservation, the residential development, the commercial development, we now arrive at kind of the infrastructure or community facilities. 4 key recommendations under community facilities: create a comprehensive community facilities plan. I recognize that there is a fairly recent plan that was created for the community related to community facilities, but it is not all-inclusive. It does not cover all your facilities. If one thing became very evident throughout this process is you have a lot of facilities and a lot of upkeep to do, and I really feel that a comprehensive all-inclusive study would be beneficial to the community. Implementing a comprehensive building maintenance program, investing in social services, as this is under community facilities as a community program. The fact is, the social services kind of lay a foundation to addressing social and economic aspects of the community, and therefore I view it as a critical infrastructure. Investing in amenities. With the committee, we had long discussions about amenities, And these are kind of things that enhance quality of life: walking trails, biking trails, those things that an active population today seek out and want to be part of, want to have as part of their community. Next slide. Specific to infrastructures, encouraging alternative modes of transportation, expanding sidewalks and walkability within the commercial areas in Thompsonville, implementing low-impact design standards. These are related to stormwater management, incorporating access management requirements in zoning. This is an approach of reducing curb cuts on the major roads to reduce congestion. Continuing the road paving program, which is actually a very effective capital improvements program you guys run, and continuing the MS4, which is stormwater management compliance program. The most significant recommendation related to public infrastructure is the creation of a sewer avoidance map. There's statutory authorities that the state requires a community to identify sewer avoidance areas. This is to reduce future costs of improvements to wastewater treatment facilities, since the state contributes. I believe Enfield had a draft map that I don't think was ever officially adopted into the POCD. So we now have that in this POCD as it's required by law. Next slide. And sustainability and resilience, focusing on some things like renewable alternatives, the implementation of renewables, the increase in public charging facilities capacity. There's actually recently, last year, passed state law that mandates some requirements related to charging facilities, zoning for charging capacity, and then also renewable leadership, kind of establishing some responsibilities within local government to lead on this. Next slide. And then a specific section on Thompsonville, recommending for an investment strategy to reposition the neighborhood to better compete, continuing the implementation of CDBG funding, the promotion and utilization of the TIF district that you guys established a few years back, consideration of a tax abatement program, zoning regulations to address non-conforming bulk and area requirements, investments in the public realm, public infrastructures, whether it be sidewalks, town green, new loan programs potentially for facade improvements and exterior improvements to other buildings, and homeowner assistance program. Typically, a POCD culminates in a land use plan. We didn't do the conventional land use plan, and we did this what we call target investment areas. The fact is, you're an older, more mature community with a well-established land use pattern. We didn't want to affect the existing residential neighborhoods. That is, we didn't want to make recommendations to change the zoning within those existing residential neighborhoods, nor did we see a need to make drastic changes to the zoning within commercial and industrial areas in town. But the fact is, there are areas in town that need specific attention. Next slide. So a series of target investment areas were ultimately focused on. Next slide. The first of which is the regional shopping district, centered around the 190 corridor and the Enfield Square Mall. Next slide. There are two corporate campus areas, one at Moody Road, and encompassing some industrial properties, some office properties, including the Lego facility. The next one, next slide, is the Mass Mutual facility as a second target area in the corporate campus areas. Next slide. While the plan took a look at all of Thompsonville, for the target investment area, we focus on the north end of Thompsonville, that is north of the 190 corridor. Next slide. And then recognizing changing, policies and programs from the state related to the state prison system, kind of a target investment area that says, establish a dialogue, pay attention, and if opportunities arise in that portion of the community, then you need to be prepared to plan for what is the future of that area. Next slide. Last but not least, then ultimately your existing industrial park area with some recommendations about maybe expanding opportunities there. Next slide. The last target investment area is ultimately the conservation area, and we have three things here. What's called natural diversities. These are sensitive habitats, protected open spaces, and ultimately farmland. Next slide. When I said early on the idea of balance, as you will notice, many of these target investment areas, the specific development ones, overlay over the top of the conservation-related areas. Therefore, neither are mutually exclusive. The idea here is if you have a proposed development within your target investment area that also has conservation areas, then you need to heighten your awareness to the conservation needs and find ways to find balance, to mitigate the negative impacts. So the last section of the plan is ultimately, or the last substantive section of the plan is ultimately the implementation section, where we provide a detailed list of kind of priorities and allocation of agencies that would be involved in the application of those, implementation of those items. So the last thing I want to touch on is a few things about housing, recognizing it's been a focus. Next slide, and then the following. As was already stated, or I'll come back to that in a second. So the reason why there is a robust housing and affordable housing section within the POCD is the result of a public act in 2017, PA 17170. The state legislature and the executive branch have made housing a priority statewide. And as a result of that, back in 17, they passed a piece of legislation that requires, and this is the statutory language here, at least once every 5 years, each municipality shall prepare an affordable housing plan for the municipality. All municipalities in Connecticut shall produce an affordable housing plan. Such plan shall specify how the municipality intends to increase the number of affordable housing developments in the municipality. This is regardless of the 8-30G and the 10%, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It's regardless of that. It is regardless whether you have 10% or 2% or 36%, that you still have to plan for affordable housing. I also want to be clear, and this is some of what was introduced earlier by the town manager, is this is not new. The statutory authority for both zoning, Section 8-2, and for the POCD, Section 8-23, since the early 1990s, have had provisions that municipalities must make provisions for the development of housing opportunity, including opportunities for multifamily dwellings for all residents of the municipality and the region, and then promote housing choice and economic diversity, including housing for both low and moderate income households. This is nothing new. In addition, there's mid-90s case law from the Connecticut Supreme Court that reviewed this language and determined it was a directive that municipalities must plan for these things, that it was not, a may, that it was being directed. With that being said, few, if any, municipalities took this seriously. Few, if any, POCDs included robust sections addressing housing and housing affordability. Jump ahead 25 years, and what does the legislature do? They pass PA 17170. That's a clear directive. Plan for affordable housing. Because you know what? No one listened to the prior statutory language. So that's essentially how we arrive here at this. In 2021, there was a controversial piece of zoning legislation called PA Public Act 2129 that made some substantial changes to zoning. While most municipalities yelled and screamed about accessory dwelling units and so forth, few paid much attention to a simple sentence within the ordinance, within the statute that said, zoning must affirmatively further the purpose of fair housing. This is a dramatic change in zoning law. Prior to this, zoning While it's recognized that various governance powers need to not run afoul of fair housing, it hasn't been common to include fair housing specifically in zoning legislation. Let's just say, this is hypothetical, a developer proposed 300 housing units to the zoning commission back 5 years ago, and the zoning commission denies it because they don't want it. The developer may have had the ability to appeal the land use decision into the courts based on the policies and procedures of zoning to get a court to rule and maybe overturn the commission. Moving forward, that's going to change. There will be 2 lawsuits that come out of a housing issue, a housing application. One will be the land use appeal into the state courts, and the other will be a federal district court fair housing appeal, because now zoning explicitly must further fair housing. That means if you don't plan for housing and affordable housing, you run the risk of running afoul of fair housing. Next slide. This is your past 5 years of the 8-30G affordable housing list, the table up top for Enfield. And you're running in 2021 at 12.4%. I just want to show you, in 2020 you were 12.72, in 19 you were 12.63, in 18 12.41, in 17 12.27. This is a moving target because the government assisted, the tenant assisted, and the mortgages fluctuate year to year. Someone has a CHFA mortgage, they sell their house, the new buyer doesn't, and that number changes. So it's always fluxing a bit. It's moving around. It's not constant. The other thing is they're still using, as of 2021, Department of Housing is still using the 2010 census to make those calculations for the total housing. You'll see the 17,558 in the first column there. I'm assuming when they finally release the 2022 numbers, they're going to update to the 2020 census, because those numbers have since been released, which your housing units increased by, I think, 181 or 183 units to 741. If all stays constant in the 2021 numbers, then you will drop to 1228, but we really don't know, 12.28. I also know there's been some talk about the 10% threshold within 8-30G. This is probably one of the most confusing sections of statute, or the most misunderstood sections of statute. The fact is, when the legislature adopted 8-30G back in the late 80s, the 10% was not established as a goal to achieve. The 10% was established to exclude the municipalities that already had a reasonable share of affordable housing so that they wouldn't be subject to 8-30G. Since its adoption, most communities in Connecticut that have less than 10% have viewed it as a goal to achieve, or municipalities have interpreted it as, so long as we have 10% affordable housing, we don't need to provide affordable housing. There's a difference between the 10% threshold and housing need. If you look on the bottom right here, HUD defines affordability as if you're paying more than 30% of your household income on housing, then housing is unaffordable. So 23.6% of your households with mortgage pay more than 30%. 18.7% without mortgages pay more than 30%. Renters, 47.5% of renters pay more than 30%. Total combined, 27.6% of households in Enfield pay more than 30%. Qualified affordable housing units, 2180, as we saw on the table above, and 12.42% affordable. Yes, you're over the 10% threshold, but no, you fall short of addressing what would be termed as housing need. Next slide. Why? Why is the renter number so high? Or why is there a need for housing? One of the biggest things is changes in demographics. And hopefully these numbers shock you because you probably don't realize them. The fact is, in Enfield, 29.2% of all households are single person. and 36.7% are two persons. So what? 67% of your households are just one or two persons. When you get into the renter category, the last column there, 40.4% of renters are single person, and 28.7% are two person, nearly 70% there. The fact is, when you're talking about a one-person household versus, let's say, a four-person family household, you're typically talking about one income versus two incomes. It's more challenging for single-person households. Let me put this in perspective. In 1960 America, only 13% of households were single-person. Today, nationwide, 28% of households are single-person. We've changed. And single persons and two-person households need different housing than families. Remember those big families of the 70s? Those television shows like The Brady Bunch, 8 is Enough? That's the exception, not the norm today. The charts on the right-hand side, the bottom one, is what would be an affordable rent at 80% AMI in the bracketed column. For a one-person household, it would be $1,460 a month. Enfield's median rent for all rental units is $1,159. The fact is, an 80% AMI affordable unit would actually, to a single person, would actually rent for higher than your median rent. Now we recognize median, half are above, half are below. 60% AMI is $1,096, slightly below the $1,159. The interesting thing is the box on the right shows new multifamily rentals. These are new construction within the Hartford market. In general, studios run around $1,265, one bedrooms around $1,600, two bedrooms around $2,100, and three bedrooms around $2,400, $2,500. The one and two bedrooms actually fall, the studios and one bedrooms actually fall very close to 80% AMI. Studios actually qualify at 80% AMI, and one bedrooms may or may not at a given moment in time. The fact is, when we're talking about affordable housing, it's not very different than market housing. In market rates, if you look at the 100% AMI column, market rate housing doesn't exceed the 100% level. Market rents actually run around 92, 93% AMI. Next slide. So, as contemplated through the creation of the plan and discussing multifamily housing and benefits, market and consumer demand has shifted. The single-person household, the two-person household, want alternatives to the 3+ bedroom single-family detached house. If you go back to the early 2000s, only about 20% of housing per year in Connecticut being constructed was multifamily. Today, it's running around 47%. That's a shift in marketplace. Housing stock diversity and newer competitive product. Most of the multifamily product in the Hartford region is pre-1990, and it's outdated. Workforce housing. Housing is where jobs go at night. Homegrown future home buyers. Capture renters, and you have potential future home buyers for your homes. Can reposition underperforming commercial properties. This is probably the most important thing in the context of Enfield from my perspective. Additional consumer spending. Every one of those households will spend money in your community. Positive municipal tax revenue. Some conclusions around your housing stock overall. It's older and aging. It's predominantly single-family detached and owner-occupied. You have an ample missing middle housing stock, that is 2s, 3s, and 4s. You have a limited older multifamily housing stock, and then moderate housing affordability overall. The top graphic, the top table here is multifamily apartments. I use 4 apartment developments from recent times. One in Wethersfield, Heirloom Flats in Bloomfield, Tempo at Evergreen in South Windsor, and the mansions at Canyon Ridge in East Windsor. Those are the actual assessed values from their respective assessors' cards. And that is Enfield's mill rate applied, and that's essentially the taxes they would pay. They total together, what, 2.4 million in taxes, 584 units. Next down is revenues. So we have property taxes at 2.4. We have an accounting of personal property taxes for motor vehicles at approximately 324,000 for 2.77 million total. Education expenditures, these are actuals based on the numbers of enrollments coming out of these developments and some calculations as to cost per enrollment. 117 enrollments, almost 10,000 per, and $1.1 million in expenses. General government expenditures, the cost of local government, another 382, I think. I can't see from here. 582, thank you. I need new glasses. So total expenditures, 1.7 million. Net fiscal positive, 1 million, if those 4 developments were actually here in Enfield. This is where it comes in with the target investment areas in your commercial properties. This is why the plan recommends multifamily housing in your BP, your BR, and your I-1. Enfield Square Mall, this is from your town records, was assessed at $61.9 million in 2011. It's assessed at $37.7 million. Based on today's mill rate, that's a loss of $800,000 in taxes over that period of time. Who's paying those taxes? When commercial values depreciate, the burden of the grand list shifts to the residential side of the grand list. So you, the residents, are paying higher taxes to make up for the depreciation in value at Enfield Square. Now, mind you, other commercial development has come in and so forth, and it's probably not exactly that. But do you want to reposition that mall? Demolish part of it, add 584 housing units to it, and gain back $1 million in revenue. That's the recommendation overall in this plan about multifamily development. How do you actually use it to A, comply with state law, and B, to reposition some of your struggling commercial properties? Mass Mutual, I know there's something potentially pending there, but Mass Mutual, Lego in that area, and then ultimately the Enfield Square Mall location and others. So with that, I believe, next slide, I say thank you and turn it back over.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. As the town council members regain the stage, I just also want to augment his presentation by talking about the state mandates. We hear about state mandates a lot. We have them across all aspects of government, from a regulatory standpoint, from education, etc. In terms of the plan of conservation and development, there is another one. And because this plan was delayed due to various factors, including the pandemic, we have been forced that every time we apply for state funding or grant over the course of the last 7 years, per section 2B, I must make a personal letter sent to the Commissioner, Secretary of the Office of Policy and Management at the state of Connecticut to ask for his dispensation to allow us to apply for those grant funds because our plan of conservation and development had been delayed past its normal implementation date. So as Dr. Paul alluded to, they are making it more difficult for communities to kind of slide by with some of these issues. And where does it hurt? It hurts us in the pocketbook in terms of our discretionary funding and grants that we're able to apply to. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mayor Corsati for the next part.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Poland, for your presentation. At this point, we will now have public comment. I will be calling you up individually, so when you hear your name come on up, you'll have three minutes. First, Jason Walsh.
Thank you. I just want to to say before I start that I appreciate all the work you guys do, and that I appreciate the opportunity to speak. So I have two issues with this plan after reading it, and I'll admit I'm no expert on any of this material. But the first issue is that it's incredibly vague. It doesn't specify anything. It makes a few suggestions. The general idea I got from all but two sections of it was that here's some things you ought to take care of. You should probably figure something out to deal with it. It gave a couple of vague suggestions on how to do that, but pretty much it didn't give any detail. And this is going to be the plan that the Zoning and Development Committee is going to be using as its guide. That is detrimental, because any person who wants to develop their land or wants to improve their land is going to not know what they need to do it. It's not very clear. And it's going to also give the planning and zoning the ability to make decisions based on what they think it's about instead of specific guidelines. So that's one of my issues. The other issue is the two things where there were specific, and the main specific, basically where they gave any detail at all, was housing and zoning. So housing, there's lots of, the gentleman up here gave a very nice presentation, and he talked a lot about housing. And I worked with affordable housing, and I've worked with housing homeless individuals 7 of the last 10 years. I've personally worked with several hundred people to get them housed, and I've actually housed over 100 people. So I have a good idea about how this works. And one of the things that has me concerned is that it's just, the idea is just, well, let's change the zoning and then we'll throw up some affordable housing. And it doesn't address any of the other issues that go along with that. I actually worked to try and get some of the homeless people I worked with to move to Enfield. I worked with some landlords here. I had some landlords lined up, and the truth is a lot of them didn't want to come here because Enfield is way out of the way for most of the stuff that they need in their life for other things. Enfield doesn't have a lot of clinical or medical facilities that they can utilize easily. Most of the social services that they deal with, they can't access easily. Most of them who do have jobs in the city, so they can't get to the city easily. So Enfield really is lacking a lot of the infrastructure necessary. And a lot of the people didn't want to move here, even though I tried to encourage them to. Out of all the people that I housed, I actually only housed one person in Enfield. And that wasn't because I didn't try. That was the only person that wanted to come here. So I just wanted to say that it takes more than just changing the zoning and throwing up some affordable housing. We need to think about that and other stuff. So, and as far as the cost of rental housing, the main reason for that is that it's high is because the federal government, HUD, says that a fair market rate for a 2-bedroom apartment in Enfield is $1,500 a month. So that's something you guys want to think about. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Patrick Thibodeau.
Thank you. I thought Dr. Poland and everybody who worked on that plan did an outstanding job. I think it's a wonderful read, a lot of great information, and it's probably one of the best things I've seen in a very long time. According to the POCD, we have lost 6% of our population, or 2,500 people, in 10 years. We are going to lose another 3,000 people by 2040. Our population is aging, our birth rate is below the replacement rate, about 30% of our households are occupied by just one person, school enrollments are dropping. This undermines our commercial retail base and shrinks our labor pool, making us unattractive for new businesses and industrial development. But have we realized that this is happening in Enfield? I don't really think so. It's difficult to see change very clearly, and maybe that is because we don't want to see it. I had a friend once tell me that we're both in our 60s, and who said to me one day, when we look in a mirror, we still see our 35-year-old selves. I had to laugh because it's true. It's a puzzle for me why the Felician Sisters plan was rejected. I'm not here to relitigate that. But the first iteration was 330 units, half seniors, half family housing. It addressed perfectly the problems that the POCD identified, the aging population and declining pool of workers. I believe the Planning Commission generally understands what the POCD is saying, but our problem is we haven't internalized it or accepted this report on an emotional level. And that's the biggest problem facing us. It's almost psychological. We must accept the town's reality, and that's painful. If we don't do this, we may continue making bad decisions. But this is really hard to do. I mean, this report is depressing. There's a separate report by the COP, the consultants here, an analysis of existing conditions in Enfield. It goes into detail about the fertility rate. Hear this. In Connecticut, our fertility rate is 1.57, which means, quote, 27 fewer persons are born for every 100 persons who die. With the fertility rate, the POC consultants wrote, and I quote, Connecticut's population would eventually decline to zero. Of course, that's not going to happen, but the point is made. The population changes are slow, but sometimes decline just happens. You think about the quote that Hemingway said, how do you go bankrupt? 2 ways, gradually, then suddenly. I was thinking about that quote when Lego said it was closing its corporate office and moving to Boston. If we don't react to Enfield's population shifts in a significant way, it won't be just a gradual decline. Similar to Lego, we will see more sudden actions to leave town and failures in our commercial and business sectors. The remedies are fairly obvious. We have to build multifamily housing in our commercial center. This will anchor our retailers, make that community walkable, and make something really unique in this region and recreate Enfield as a place that people want to live, because right now we're a town filled with single people and single couples, and that's just not good. So you may adopt this plan of conservation and development, but if we don't fully understand its warning and embrace it and make it part of the lens on how we see our community, it will not do us any good. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next, Mike Ray.
Thank you. I'm an awful public speaker, so please bear with me. Following the previous gentleman's comments, as it stands, the state is experiencing e-migration for lower-cost areas of living and higher-paying jobs. So if people are offered a higher-paying job, they're going to take it. They tend to go where jobs are. This scenario appears to be the opposite. We are attempting to increase housing and, by extension, the labor pool to hopefully bring in new jobs. And hope is traditionally not a very good strategy to get the outcome that you want. So the concept of supply-side economics is being applied to human labor at the local level with an influx of labor through this policy. And its offshoot, modern monetary theory, is being applied to the currency at the macro level, which is printing more money. How will you reconcile reducing the value of labor in an inflationary environment when the citizens of this town are already strained so heavily? How does this mandate address businesses already leaving or going bankrupt due to increased competition with other businesses such as Amazon? If the goal is to attract new businesses like Amazon with reduced labor costs, what will happen to those that lose their jobs as a result of an increase in competition? How does this address the overall increase in automation putting existing jobs at risk? And then a lot of these projects seem to be subsidized. In fact, they are. Can you name an instance where subsidizing something makes it more affordable? You can see traditionally with things like healthcare and college, it really just drives the cost up because the bar to entry, if you're going to give somebody a $12,000 loan, why would I charge less than $12,000? So if you're going to have subsidized housing or some form of it, some offshoot, that becomes the bar to entry by default. And lastly, the word fair is used frequently in this presentation. Can you define and quantify fairness? How will we know when we have successfully achieved enough fairness? Thank you.
Lori Longy.
Lori Longy, 1427 Enfield Street. I sat on the Planning and Zoning Commission for many years, and I helped write the last plan of conservation and development. I'm very familiar with the last two plans and typically how the plan is developed by its residents. It's supposed to be used as a benchmark for evaluating compatibility for future development proposals with long-range development objectives of the community, meaning a proposal that comes in and meets the plan has a better shot of getting approved than one that comes in that doesn't meet the plan. Why are we making all these major changes like apartments that can be on 5 acres? It doesn't feel like a community had much input into this plan. I myself attended the last public meeting at the town hall. I attended with my neighbors, and even though we brought up historic district questions, lowering density in residential areas, looking at 2-family residential instead of high-rise apartments for all of Enfield, the focus of that meeting was just Thompsonville. We asked about the other parts of town. None of what we brought up was ever made into the plan. It is disturbing because the purpose of this plan is to get public input. I watched a lot of the meetings on Cable 16. Most of the meetings were Zoom with 4 or 5 people, and 2 were staff members. The other were board members. This was not a citizen-driven plan. When I read parts of the new plan, especially the housing section, I actually thought there was a typo when the acreage size for multifamily housing was changed from the current 60 acres down to 5 acres. I thought they must mean 50 acres. No, they meant 5 acres. So as a quick example, just to show the impact of this change, I took the little strip of land that's by me from Oliver Road to Fruit Terrace, and that would make 14 parcels in that little area available for multifamily housing. I sat on the board when we wrote the apartment regulations, and we had the planner tell us all the parcels that this regulation would affect so that we would know the impacts to Enfield. So how many residential parcels are over 5 acres in Enfield? We need this information before we made such a big change. Is it 50, 100, 200, 500? We don't know this. We studied densities and looked at what other towns had before the planning and zoning ever came to 10 units per acre. We need better charts, page 19 and 45, and they really need to say where this information has come from. I sat on the housing study for the town of Enfield in 2008, and we had information that gave the name of all the apartment complexes, how many units, how many bedrooms, what the rents were charged. The charts gave numbers, but there's no way for us to know where this information has come from. It's not sourced. We don't know which complexes have been counted. We should have a list of these apartment properties, and we should also have what has been approved and not yet been built in these charts. Those approved apartments are over 200 plus apartments, and they are more important to be in the chart because that's what documents the growth of the apartments and the progress that Enfield has made. So how can this information not be in the plan? Thank you. I'll come back with later.
Next, Ellen Martin.
Ellen Martin, 6 Patricia Circle in Enfield. After reading through the proposed plan of conservation and development, I'm still trying to figure out what the vision is for our town, especially when reviewing the housing sections. Are we going to change the characteristics of our town? Because I saw a lot of zone changing recommendations. Is it to increase the population in our town? If so, by how many? I would like to know that. Is it to put up as many affordable housing, multifamily housing, workforce housing units that you can fit in? It would kind of be a nice thing to know what your plan is and how much you want to increase it. I know we've decreased our population here in Enfield. I mean, we used to fill a school bus in the development that I moved into with a whole development full of kids going to the elementary schools. So I do believe we do need to do something about the housing. But what I'm questioning is some of your methods. Under Chapter 5, residential development, you're allowing multifamily housing in BR, BP, and I-1 zones. I think putting multifamily units in the business zones is a good thing for both the businesses and the potential residents. It gives them a place to go to near where they live if it's within walking distance. I think putting multifamily units in industrial zones is a bad thing. Haven't we learned from the experience of the Winstanley building and the dissatisfaction of the residents in that area? Industrial areas are subject to 24/7 usage, which doesn't make good sense for a residential area. At least I don't want to live there. Reducing the multifamily minimum lot size from the current zone regulation of 60 acres to 5 acres, I think would be a mistake. I wonder how many 5 to 59 acre lots privately owned are in Enfield that would now qualify for putting up multifamily units. By instituting those two changes, I feel the developer would automatically win if they comply with the regulations, and the residents surrounding that property lose any chance of having their opinions count. Labeling the prison area is another thing. With a new yet undefined zone, I don't know what special development really means. If my memory serves me correct, back in 2000 or thereabouts, some of that prison property, I think it was well over 100 acres, was designated and protected as a grassland bird habitat. How can we continue to protect that, the birds, the endangered birds, if we allow more development in that area? And I do believe we need to keep a list and look at how many buildings have already been approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission for this type of housing. 156 South Road, elderly housing residential complex with 96 units. 359 Hazard Avenue, the old Y, that's already being redeveloped. Enfield Gardens, 19 units, already started. Blair Manor was approved with 40 units. There's multifamily approval for building in George Washington Road area. I'm not sure of what the numbers are there. Downtown Thompsonville, that I believe is about 40 units. And I think St. Adalbert just got approved for more housing units, and I'm not sure how many that was. Just looking at those, that's 200 units available without George Washington and St. Adalbert's. My concern is if we don't keep a list, you're going to start putting more and more and more and more and more. We're already at 12%, over 12%. I'm not saying that multifamily housing and affordable housing is not good for our town. It is. But I think we need to look at how many we already have and what's in the hopper. My main question is basically how much do you want to increase the population? I do believe without changing that minimum lot size and without putting residential units in industrial zones and without changing the prison area to a special development, there are enough properties in Enfield that would still qualify for multifamily and affordable housing and workforce housing and senior housing. Keep in mind, we already have 12%. I don't want to take the burden of every town and put it into Enfield. Thank you.
Next, Nikki Price.
Good evening, Nikki Price, 1324 Enfield Street. Tonight I'm here to express my thoughts on the Plan of Conservation and Development Plan 2022 to 2032 POCD. My concern is this plan heavily focuses on Thompsonville revitalization goals and ignores other vital areas of Enfield. For example, historic resources. Only 2 paragraphs are written as compared to multiple in the current POCD. Not mentioned are historic and cultural resources, historic preservation, culture policies, role of the federal and state governments, and state and local plans. There are 4 historic districts: Enfield Street Historic District, Enfield Shakers Historic District, Hartford Bigelow Carpet Mills Historic District, and Hazardville Historic District, as well as cemeteries. Some have gravestones dating from 1696. Groups like the Enfield Historic Society, the Enfield Cemetery Association, and various individuals have documented the history of Enfield cemeteries, gravestones, stone carvers, and their clients. This plan seeks to abolish the taxpayer's voice by eliminating public hearings, which is contradictory to Section A-23 of the Connecticut General Statutes. To complicate matters even further, this plan allows town staff to fast-track any project they deem key by saying certainty is approved, meaning town staff has the ability to keep the public in the dark as to what building projects are sanctioned. The POCD uses the term multifamily, but does not say what it means. What is multifamily? A building containing 2 families, 5, 10, or more families. Workforce housing is not a term recognized by the state of Connecticut. Then why is it in the POCD? In closing, let us all keep in mind that this POCD is a plan from which all involved should benefit equally. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Anzalone.
Thank you, Mayor Crisati. Zaxanoni, 6 Howard Street, Enfield, Connecticut. So first and foremost, I want to think about not only what are we doing to actively expand and enhance the quality of life here in Enfield, but most importantly, that development is not at the expense of quality of life here in the town of Enfield. Rather than be a little bit ambiguous, I have some targeted concerns, and I did note my full comments and provided them to the clerk to be included in the record. But I have 3 main concerns specifically within line items in the POCD that I want to address tonight. Chapter 7, page 52, discusses the idea of limiting or seizing the practice of holding public hearings on site plan applications. I find that incredibly concerning, given that that is the only venue for the residents of this town to speak about concerns about site plan applications. And specifically, often we are able to get concessions from developers when engaging in public hearing, and those developers hear those concerns. When you limit that, you negate the opportunity for the developer and the residents to engage in a conversation about how to improve their site plan to make it more palatable to the residents of the town. So I truly hope that we can consider the council ultimately striking that recommendation, ensuring that we continue public hearings here in the town of Enfield on site plan applications. Secondly, it's cluster housing. It's noted in the document on page 49. It's labeled as small lot open space subdivision. That's a term for cluster housing. As the town manager mentioned, this is a state mandate, but I want a little more detail into this, specifically regarding when you talk about cluster housing. It's often used so you have a lot and it's environmentally sensitive space, and what you're doing is you're combining that housing together, lowering the lot size. But I don't care whether it's a 1 acre lot or a 1/4 of an acre lot. If it's in an environmentally sensitive space, I have concerns about that, and I think the public is pretty unanimous in the belief that we need to be ensuring the conservation part of this document, and so that is of concern of mine. Also is the lowering of the parking stall minimums on page 48. So this is good in theory, not in practice. I'm sure there was someone very intelligent at a very prestigious university that came up with the idea. But if you take a trip out into communities where this happens, go out on a Friday night, Saturday night, I don't think anybody wants to spend 30 minutes trying to find a parking spot. We are not at a place here in the town of Enfield where we can remove that. We are a car-dependent town. I'm not a fan of that. I think we need to move more towards walkability. But at this stage in the game, we as a town are not ready to do that. We should not be removing our parking minimums. The only benefit is lowering costs for the developers, but again, that should not come at the expense of the quality of life for the residents of this town. Overall, I think this document is heading in a good direction, but I think as others have noted, regardless of where it is, it's most importantly that we adhere to the document. I understand that it's a guide point, and some have discussed the 2010 Plan of Conservation and Development. do a side-by-side of where we are with that document, how much have we followed it. So it's incredibly important that we do that. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Paul Janisowski.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to be very brief and echo the concerns of some speakers that were up before me. First and foremost, the idea that public hearings might be an impediment to planning and development and moving this plan forward. I take exception to that a great deal. As speakers before me have said, it's very important, critically important that the public has input and the public is able to hear what its government elected people are doing with our development in town. So I oppose that plan vehemently and ask that it be stricken. The other thing is, I'm now a full-time housing provider in Thompsonville. I also have some other property in another community where I can tell you from firsthand experience, being involved with property management, that 1.75 parking spaces for a unit doesn't work. I've got tons of one-bedroom units where I need 2 parking spaces in the development that I'm involved with, let alone start making 1.75 for a 2-bedroom unit. It's not going to work. Downtown, where I have very limited parking for the houses that I own downtown, on-street parking becomes a must. In the wintertime, that becomes disastrous. So let's not be short-sighted with this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Karen LaPlante.
I planned for at least 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to come back too. Karen LaPlante, 166 North Maple Street. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission, and I was a member of the steering committee. I'm here tonight to speak as a citizen concerned with some of the content of this new plan. Overall, the maps are horrendous. If anybody tried to look at any of the maps on the plan, you couldn't tell anything from them. The TIA areas were never discussed by the steering committee, to my knowledge, and I only missed 2 meetings. On occasion, comments were submitted by Mr. Poland directly to and members were not able to discuss any suggested changes. I will try to steer you to the pages I'm concerned with if you would like to follow along for reference. Page 37, the DEEP Natural Diversity Database map. The map was updated by DEEP in December of 2022. We need to put that map in our POCD. Full page. Page 38, expand 490 for open space. The Town Council should approve an ordinance to allow PA 490 to be expanded to include the PA 490 open space classification. The Conservation Commission forwarded this suggestion for the proposed ordinance to the Town Council, I believe, back in July, and we are still waiting for its successful passage to avoid the issues we had with the tax assessor. Page 40, again, PA 490, to see if we can make it more farm-friendly. I would like to suggest the wording be changed to something like encourage and promote enrollment in the PA 490 program to qualified landowners to help preserve open space, agricultural, forest, and natural resource land in Enfield. What it says there now just doesn't work. Page 45, I believe the first sentence under the overall residential pattern may need revision. I believe these numbers were from the 2011 POCD, and I can't believe they haven't changed. Bullet number 2 on page 48, allow multifamily housing in BRBP, BL, and I1 zoning districts. The question is, what do you anticipate the population of Enfield to be in the next 10 years? People already have issues with warehouses in industrial districts, as a majority of soils in the industrial districts in town are designated as prime or important farmland soils. Shouldn't we be thinking about how we can take advantage of this natural resource and encourage more farming of food on these soils and becoming a more sustainable community by providing food for the region instead of another housing development that might be better sited on soils of less importance. Bullet 1 on page 52, remove barriers to investment. By removing the reliance of special permit uses and limiting or ceasing the practice of holding public hearings, we are undermining the trust we have in the process of open and transparent government. We should not be afraid or deny the public an opportunity to speak at a public hearing on a proposed project. Many times they have valid concerns, provide additional information not provided in an application, and have firsthand knowledge of environmental concerns. The Conservation Commission has been told more than once that they may petition to Inland Wetlands or Planning and Zoning Commission and request a public hearing and voice their concerns on an application. Streamlining an application by ceasing public input denies the opportunity for citizens to voice their opinions and lacks transparency. Public hearings are an important part of the process and should not be stopped. I'll stop there and come back.
Thank you. Next, Lorraine Creedy.
Good evening. Much briefer comments. I just wanted to say that I'm pleased to see the emphasis on affordable housing in the plan. The increase in affordable housing is important to the town in that we need places where we can house our elderly, who we have many of, and also as starter places of residence for our young people who are leaving town. They go to Windsor Locks and they go to Springfield and other places like that in order to get apartments in places that they can live independently on their own. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Next, Donna Dubanowski.
We all planned for 5 minutes, so I'm doing ADUs. We, as a town, with a 2/3 of vote, already voted down allowing ADUs. This should not be in the plan of conservation and development at all, and it needs to be removed. We have no need for ADUs. Number one, these units would become a huge issue to the sewer system, water, schools, roads, and they'd also create an issue for the owner to refinance the property, whether they are attached or detached. The town should never allow 2 homes to be built on one small lot. California created ADUs because of lack of land. Enfield does not have a land problem because, one, we plan properly, and we go through our planning and zoning for additions to homes. We go through the process to determine if they have a legal way to add an apartment or an in-law. Bypassing and changing the zoning regulations, as you want to in this plan, would certainly create a problem for us residents to be able to speak out as we are tonight. Throughout this guide, you're constantly asking us to change the zoning regulations, to remove all barriers, and to limit or cease to exist public hearings. As stated before, all references to this must be removed. We have to have the right to speak at any public hearings, no matter what. For example, you have my neighbor wants to install solar panels in their backyard to exceed the high restrictions if roof mounted. With this plan, you want to remove the barriers. Quote, zoning regulations, remove regulatory barriers and allow alternative energy sources to be installed in residential and commercial developments. For example, allow the installation of solar panels in required yards or to exceed high restrictions in roof mounted, and allow heat pumps to encroach in required yards. There would be no way for me to speak out if you changed the current zoning regulations. And I don't want my neighbor to have a big solar panel thing in the backyard. The other area is community facilities and open space. I believe we're looking to retain or increase space to about 21%. So if that's the case, why would we ever give up Brainerd Park? This plan says park and ball facilities, recreation, assessment, complete a detailed evaluation of all parks, facilities, equipment, and ball fields, including the assessment of the number of types of fields in comparison to community size, utilization, and needs. This should include detailed maintenance requirements and an estimated 5 to 10 year maintenance schedule in the budget. All right, so now you want to, strategies and improvement, you want to invest in amenities. Enfield, invest in those community facilities that function as amenities of place, i.e. parks, walking trails, library, etc. Brainerd Park has all of that on its 32.6 acres of land. When Agnes Brainerd donated the land, she called it the choicest acres to enjoy forever. I believe it was the first public park to be donated to the town. The deed states it being the express wish that the premises be used for the purpose of a playground or a park. It is very accessible to people with handicaps like myself. Easy to access the playground, basketball, baseball, softball, walking trails, all in one place, accessible within walking distance to the neighborhoods surrounding Brainerd Road. Allowing the park to go to a private organization is the complete opposite of Mrs. Brainerd's wishes. And Ellen claiming that it has had problems, deaths. Why was this never reported in the newspaper? If there are deaths and overdose at Brainerd Park, we should have been informed. And it is the responsibility of the town of Enfield to take care of that park. We were given $1 million property, and we're going to blow it because it's not being taken care of.
You can come back. Thank you.
Yep, I'll come back.
Next, Gretchen Pfeiffer Hall.
Good evening, Gretchen Pfeiffer Hall, 4 Summers Road. Thank you for this opportunity, and I also want to say how nice the new auditorium is, and Enfield should be proud of this. So this is an important document, and I have a few sort of corrections to point out. And on page 2, there is a name spelled incorrectly and informal names used instead of formal names, and for a document such as this, I don't think that's appropriate. Go to the maps. So as Karen LaPlante said, the maps, they need to be legible and they should be a full page. The map 3, the Natural Diversity Database, is not the most current map available. And on map number 4, the protected open space, I think that should be broken into more categories, especially the municipal designations should differentiate between parks, athletic fields, show hiking trails, and also farms in the state farmland preservation program should either be in this map or a separate map in chapter 4. The map for targeted investment area at the prison includes land that should be identified in the protected open space map. There are approximately 120 plus or minus acres that are preserved in perpetuity as mitigation for the development of Rentschler Field in East Hartford. They are preserved on both sides of Taylor Road for grassland bird habitat and managed by the DEP since approximately 2001. On page 23, under Historic Resources, the Hartford-Bigelow Carpet Mills and Hazardville Historic Districts are both National Register Historic Districts, and this needs to be clarified so as not to confuse people into thinking they are regulated the same way as a municipal historic district. Acronyms are used a lot in this document. They're confusing to the average reader with little or no planning background, like MS4 is used multiple times, and I don't think I ever saw where it's spelled out. I'm still not sure what MS4 is. It sounds like part of a James Bond movie. Page 52, the suggestion to limit or cease the practice of public hearings on site plan application is very concerning. I'm totally opposed to it. Seems like today transparency is the big buzzword,
and this flies in the face of transparency. Residents should have the opportunity to weigh in on changes being proposed in our community. I don't understand why multifamily housing should be allowed in the I-1 zone. These areas are mostly away from the center of town. They contain much farmland with our prime soils, and this contradicts the effort to encourage and preserve farming. I'm strongly in favor of continuing the efforts to preserve land for agricultural use and agricultural activities. This language should be strengthened to include funding of the Municipal Farmland Preservation Program by the Town Council on an annual basis. I am also strongly in favor of investing in amenities such as parks, walking trails such as rail trails, and other passive recreational activities. Page 25 addresses the expectations of home buyers and why they choose to purchase in a given community. As a realtor, I can attest to the fact that they want amenities and the experience of place. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mary Ellen DeLuzio.
Dear council members, in reviewing the proposed POCD, I was pleased to see that it recognizes Enfield's cultural landscape and vision is framed by the love of history, reflected in our historical neighborhoods, especially evident on Enfield Street. Adding to this is the picturesque landscape of rolling hills and agriculture, the convenience of shopping areas surrounded by tract housing, and added feature of industrial areas. All this combines to describe...
Just state your name.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mary Ellen DeLuzio, 1330 Enfield Street, Enfield. All this combines to describe Enfield's community character as that of a New England village. This is indeed how people think of Enfield and why they are attracted to this town. However, the rest of the book goes on to describe changes to the cultural landscape completely in opposition to maintaining this very feature that attracts people to our town. The plan mentions Enfield's population slightly decreasing, the same as the rest of Connecticut, and concludes we must expand our population and keep growing, but it does not explain why this is necessary. The method for embracing change is mentioned several times throughout the book, and it's emphasizing more multifamily housing. It states recent housing trends favor this, but no information is cited to back this statement up. This term, like many others, is not defined in the book. The book needs an index of definitions. It seems to me the plan has concluded that this is the major solution to Enfield's future. There is no zoning categories like there were in the previous book. That book was 333 pages long, and this one is 100 pages. The current book is a green light to huge apartment building complexes. Anywhere in town there is 5 acres, cited on page 9. Why are we steering citizens of this town to becoming renters and instead of encouraging private home ownership? This enriches landlords instead of helping people attain New England's tradition of private property ownership. Private property ownership was a concept uniquely expressed in our Constitution and was a major factor in creating the middle class. Helping people own a home is helping them gain equity and future financial stability. This is what the attraction of Enfield has been, to offer homes for young families and get a start. Home ownership gives people a reason to be vested in their town. They are more likely to contribute to all other aspects of what it means to live in Enfield. Therefore, for multifamily housing, we need incentives for owner-occupied units and not absentee landlords, which seems to be a huge problem, especially in the Thompsonville area. This can be attained in many ways, and it would be great to have a discussion on this. Some possibilities may be to lift the moratorium on condos, lowering the allowed square footage for houses from 1,200 to 1,000, or encouraging developments like Abbeywood that is very popular. I'm not saying we shouldn't have more apartments in Enfield or allow condos everywhere, but with proper planning, we can create this opportunity in town. I realize I'm finished. I'll come back to bring up my other points. My other question is, the last several slides, I don't know if they're in the plan. I don't recall seeing them there. A lot of information was thrown on that, so I'd love to have copies of those, to review them. In addition, it's very interesting, Dr. Pullen's proposal about the Enfield Mall and the apartment housing units there seems very good idea, but that's private property, so I don't know how that works. There's a lot of questions I have about what the data that was presented, and we have no opportunities really to ask the questions to get answers to those. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Anne Marie Galderas.
Hi, everyone. Anne Marie Galdenzi, 1330 Enfield Street. Thank you for letting me have this time to talk to you today. I do realize the new POCD, there was a lot of time and effort was put into that, so thanks for letting me speak to it. Enfield is a suburban type town where people come to live but usually work in other towns. We are usually referred to as a bedroom community, with most people commuting to other cities for work. Suburban type living lends itself to mainly single family homes with multifamily dwellings, shopping areas, some business districts, and even industrial areas. This is Enfield. The major concern reading the new POCD is that it presents itself in a way that will in turn turn Enfield into more of an urban type environment. One of these ways it does this is by comparing Enfield to East Hartford, Hartford, West, and West Hartford. These areas are much more city or urban living areas. We compare ourselves to people who live in a higher density population area with all that goes along with it. Suburban type living usually lends itself to less dense housing areas. Housing is more open and spread out. We need to think and remember that Enfield is a suburban area, not urban city living area. We want to keep that flair in Enfield. Enfield should be compared to the towns surrounding it for a comparison to the same style of living. Therefore, to compare us to greater Hartford urban area, it doesn't seem quite accurate. I would like to see a comparison to Suffield and Summers, our neighbors. There is a very interesting table on page 48, table 9, called the housing by income compared to existing housing stock by value. No footnotes are presented to the detail where the data comes from or what the year of the data is from. That would be an interesting point, in fact, to know. But if we do look at the various columns across the income spectrum, the units available versus adequate income line, the last line summarizes the table. As you read across the line, deficit or surplus of housing by income is listed. The large deficit of housing stock is for households whose income is greater than $75,000 and on up, for a total housing deficit of $4,620. This compares to housing for household incomes between $25,000 and $74,999, which is a housing surplus of 8,444 units. Reading the lowest levels of the housing income, which is income between $15,000 and $24,999, yields a deficit of 618 units. This table, in fact, can I just finish the sentence? This table, in fact, notes that Enfield needs more housing for higher income households. Providing households for income range would bring our house stock into greater balance. And I'll come back later. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Kelly Hemler.
Kelly Hemler, 10 Hartford Ave. I think one of the most alarming things in this POCD, which is mentioned several times, is to fast track the, well, they're calling it a remove barriers of investment. And that is to reduce or cease the practice of public hearings. Fast tracking anything is always a bad idea. Government moves slowly, and it's on purpose. It's by design. It's to reduce errors. Another alarming thing I read through the whole POCD was to encourage and allow greater density. So one of our biggest strengths of Enfield is that we have a small urban area in Thompsonville. We have farms. We have a bedroom community. We have it all. And to make it more dense is to make it all like Thompsonville. And don't get me wrong, I live in Thompsonville. I love it there. But I don't want the whole town like that. You know, so those, I would say those are the two most alarming things. I know I had more. And reducing any parking would also, I would say, would be a bad idea. That's about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next, Rob Anderson.
How are you? Rob Anderson, 34 Bass Drive. A few things, just gonna jump around. Encouraging planting trees at the roads. I'm not a big fan of that. As the trees grow, they start messing up the roads, messing up the sidewalks. Eventually the trees fall down. The maintenance involved with it. It looks pretty, but pretty's not always the best. It's been stated a few times, but the parking issues, lowering the parking spaces per dwelling unit, whatever it is, parking's already an issue in Thompsonville. You're going to go and lower the parking requirements in an area that already has parking issues. You're just going to make things worse. It's going to be like LA. If anybody's ever been to LA, you want to park somewhere, you got to walk a mile after you park to get where you're going. Zach, I want to say, everything you said, I agree with. That may never happen again. Losing the hearings, no, we can't lose the hearings. That's not an option. The stat of 40% of the housing is a single person living there. I think you combine that with the amount of people that have not moved out, the amount of kids that have not moved out of mom and dad's basement. I think the bigger thing is getting people together, getting people to congregate, to meet. Maybe we can get a lot of these people that are living by themselves to live together. You know, community dating. Everybody gets together, and now we have a housing, you know, there's all kinds of apartments and stuff open because everybody moved in together. Then maybe there's a baby boom after that, who knows? I'll end with one last comment. the future, you will own nothing, and you will like it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Joseph Golis.
Joseph Golis, 31 Stardust Drive in Enfield, Connecticut. I'll preface my remarks by saying this. I was born in this town. It is the town of Enfield. It is not the city of Enfield. Hartford has been trying for years to make us the city of Enfield. I can say this without any regret. This town can exist without Hartford, but Hartford cannot exist without this town. Your POCD report, I'm not here to take it apart. I'm here because I was a former manufacturing engineer, supply chain engineer, and then for the last 16 years, a science teacher in chemistry and biology. So I would like to give you some chemistry, biology, including the fact that we have the University of Massachusetts, which is a world-renowned soil science university. Why do I say that? Let me give you some information. This is a fact. It's not my opinion. The carbon we have in the air pales in comparison to nitrogen, which is 70% of our air. The last time I checked, nitrogen is not toxic, nitrogen is not global warming, and the other 28% is oxygen. Last time I checked, oxygen is not global warming, and so forth. The bigger gas after that is water vapor, which controls our weather, not carbon dioxide. Okay, what holds the most carbon dioxide and carbon? And by the way, we are being led to believe that carbon dioxide is the only carbon we should concern ourselves in the environment. Sorry, plastics and carbon-formed materials, which is a lot of what our fabrics are and so forth, are carbon. 50 times more carbon is sinked or taken out of the air by the ocean. 20 times more carbon is taken out of the air by land, 3 times more carbon is taken out by lands, plants, and soil. The air itself does a very poor job of taking carbon dioxide out. The best carbon dioxide resource is rocks and sediment and grasses that grow higher than our regular grasses. Does that mean I'm finished? All right. Okay, so.
You can come back.
Pardon me?
You can come back.
I can't?
Yeah. Oh, no. You
Thank you very much, Mayor. I appreciate it. I will be back.
Okay, thank you. Next, Andrew Cody. Andrew here?
We have a substitute right here. She'll take it. Angela Foss. Can you add her to the list?
Angela Foss.
Thank you.
Angela Foss, 16 Crescent Beach Drive. So I brought along with me the POCD from 2011, which I'm sure you probably have seen, and the POCD that we're going to talk about tonight. It's a drastic comparison. It really is. I wanted to volunteer my time free of charge if you would like me to help add to the document. And I'm sure others in the room would be happy to do the same. So first of all, I wanted to say that the authors of this book, I'm sure that they worked really hard on this, but it's 100 pages long instead of the 300-something pages of the 2011 document. And I want to make this comprehensive statement to the document. Throughout, there are graphs and tables that are presented with explanations given that are very biased. One simple example is the demographic table on page 16. This shows a population decrease in our town and makes a broad statement that this is due to Enfield's demographic stagnation, which is intimately tied to the stagnant job growth of Connecticut and Hartford region. If this was correct, then you would see the same results in the data beside this, comparing Enfield to the Hartford County and the state of Connecticut. You can see that the table clearly says there's an increase in population for both Hartford County and the state of Connecticut by 1%. Presumed statements such as these must be removed from this document, as they are not based in fact, and no fact list is given as to where they came from. This document is full of such statements such as less disposable household income, spending less on consumer goods, contributes to retail vacancies, weak real estate market. The real estate market is booming. Ask any realtor in the Enfield area. We are getting ready to sell my parents' home, and I've been told that there are not enough homes available for all the buyers in Enfield, and there's bidding wars still. You are all brilliant minds. You know that what I'm stating is correct. As for the statements about our mall included in this document, you all know why the mall is empty. The mall is empty because it has not been maintained or updated. Let's compare this with the similar indoor mall, the West Farms Mall. On the West Farms website, it simply states, it's a contemporary indoor mall offering many brand name retail stores and cafes with central seating areas. Online reviews give it high ratings. Google it. Things like, I visited yesterday and enjoyed the nostalgia of walking through a mall that isn't on its last legs. Compare the mall to ours. Go to our mall and walk through it. Look in the stores and see the ceiling tiles are stained due to the leaking roof. We all know the costs associated with a store that would have a leaking roof and damage to retail goods that causes. No retailer would want to rent space in a location like that, and no person would want to shop in a space like that. I'll be back.
Thank you. Is there anybody else whose name was not on the list?
So first off, thank you very much. Joshua Hamry, 52 New King Street. Just, the vending machines are across the hall down to the cafeteria area in case you wanted to grab a snack. So, I appreciate the presentation and highlighting that this is a plan that is not a commitment. It's not a set thing. It is a fluid 10-year look forward. A lot of good points made tonight. And I do agree with the public speaking portion of the comments that it is necessary to maintain that within all aspects of the government process. I will say this much. I've worked with the homeless population for the last 5 years or so. And over the last 3 years, there's been a generational and seismic shift in housing stability. We have a pandemic that has not yet finished running its course. We have a mortgage rate that has doubled in the last 6 months. We have a significant population that is aging out. They're growing, they're getting older, and they're facing a fixed income with no ability to maintain, rather less ability to maintain their ability to pay their taxes and any other fixed costs that they are bound to. So we have a situation, and I wish I could offer solutions. I can't. I can just highlight my concerns, that we have a population that's aging, a population that is growing and shifting demographically speaking. We have to do something. There's got to be something that provides additional housing units, and it's always cheaper to build up than build out. So if that's offering any solution, please let somebody run with it. We have a very serious concern, and to the point of the, I really do appreciate the gentleman that spoke earlier with his experience helping the homeless, getting housed. His numbers are greater than mine, so I can understand and appreciate his ability to hit those numbers. To those points that he had, the people that don't want to come to Hartford that are housing insecure, I would agree with that. I can see that. But I assure you that the housing instability that is happening in the work that I do is not coming from out of town. We're talking about Enfield's own. And the people that have been living in those single-family homes by themselves under the graphic that was one person paying the rent and paying the mortgage on their own, they are the ones that are facing the brunt of the issues right now. In my experiences, those are the ones that are being forced out because they can no longer afford the rent that the landlord has increased. They have additional expenses, as everybody does, in their grocery bills and everything else. But these are not out-of-towners that are being affected. These are Enfield's own for the most part, and they are being forced out of their own housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sharon Santosky. I live at 1435 Enfield Street, and I'm one of the renters that you highlighted earlier. But I'm here tonight because I'm considering buying a home in Enfield, and I wanted to tell you that this plan concerns me as someone who is considering buying a home here. I'm not going to go through all the details because others have done a much better job than I would have. Ellen Martin, Zach, the gentleman who spoke first tonight, I agree with everything they've said. I think the biggest thing that that I saw when reviewing the plan was that, I think Ellen mentioned this, was an unclear vision for what this town is supposed to be. The gentleman who spoke earlier said, are we the city of Enfield or are we the town of Enfield? The key themes of this community, if they're preserving historic resources, scenic resources, farms and farmland, then it's going to be difficult to do that while removing barriers to investment, redevelopment, and new development, allowing greater density and diversity of land use, and adding more incentives and less public oversight of planning and zoning. I think everybody made it loud and clear that removing public hearings is a bad idea, and I would agree with that wholeheartedly. If you take away the community's voice, why would I want to be part of this community? I think with, again, other folks have said this too, I realize this is a monumental task, and with all due respect to Goldman and York, the plan itself reads a bit like a Swiss Army knife of plans. That's something we would say in the corporate world, where you have a plan that's trying to make everybody happy, include everything, and at the end it ends up saying nothing. So it's very difficult to figure out what is the long-term vision for this community when we have everything piled in there. And again, if you read this from someone from the outside, it reads very much as the plan is at odds with itself. I think, again, and I think Dr. Pollan said it in his overview, if things can be easily cherry-picked out of the plan to serve whatever agenda somebody has, then it's probably not a great plan. So I would just urge the council to go through this with a fine-tooth comb. Do not ram it through. Take on board what everybody has said today, including someone who is considering buying a home here. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, is there anybody else that has not approached us yet, that has not signed up?
Yep, I'm approaching. Hi, Linda Ostapoff, 109 Cottage Road. I'm here to bother you again about the top of page 52, remove barriers to investment, update the zoning regulations with the aim of repositioning commercial and industrial areas to encourage development by reducing the reliance on special permit uses, limiting or ceasing the practice of holding public hearings on site plan applications. This statement really concerns me. More, not less, public input is needed here. The course of development in our town should be guided by the people who live here and by those we have elected to represent us. Reducing or eliminating public hearings on site plan applications will not improve Enfield. Many neighboring towns have enacted regulations to preserve the character of their towns. We should be doing the same thing. There are many positive possibilities that we've heard recently and tonight for new housing and new businesses in Enfield. These things would all be great. Development needs to be done here with care to make our town desirable to families and to younger people, lest we become a town known for empty warehouses and old people. That requires input from people who live here and care about what happens to Enfield. This statement in the POC seems more intended to me to eliminate input from residents and rubber stamp development without regard to value. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
Hello, Lori Parker, 105 Cottage Road. I just want to start with, this was not an easy document to understand. It's large, technical. I would have liked to have more opportunities for input. I recall one meeting at the annex and then nothing after that except for a specific one to Thompsonville. I would have liked to see a focus on other neighborhoods like Hazardville, Skiddaco, Southwood Acres, and even the lakes was only mentioned 2 times in this entire document. And specifically on page 28, it mentions forests, hills, fields, rivers, ponds, and streams, but there are 2 lakes in this town. And page 36 does notate that as it is a sensitive area. In general, I looked at the last plan and this plan. Again, these are not easy to understand, but I'm trying. The latest one is about 1/3 of the size, 100 pages versus 320. So I went through both of them trying to compare what's missing. Some things that stood out was the recent one did not have a build-out capacity analysis, and I've been trying to get the answer as to how much is Enfield been built out. I know in the 1999 one prior to this, we were almost at capacity. This one also has a lot less visuals, photos, matrices, legends, whereas this was a lot easier to understand and visualize with all the legends and photos in there. Also did not see anything in here about the regional context. This went into a lot about Suffield, Summers, Longmeadow, neighboring towns, and I'm interested in knowing how they're able to maintain the rural character and also balance their budget. There was also a lot in the older one about the community character and the public perceptions that I didn't see in here. So there's a lot to go through. They're both very comprehensive, but I think there's a lot more that we could be added. And I'm always looking at what is our vision. Do we want to look like any highway exit, in the country? They all look the same with, box stores and chain stores, and we have a uniqueness that I think it's on page 22. People state they like the aesthetics and they're important values to this, and I'd like to see more preservation and additions to historical areas, the Shakers, the Hazards, Bigelow, what keeps us unique. I'm gonna have to come back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at this point, we will entertain the people who could not finish. We will first start with Lori Longy, and then Karen, and then Donna will be after that.
Okay.
I think we get the point.
Okay. Lori Longy, 1427 Enfield Street. Someone should define what multifamily means in this plan. Is it 2 units, 3 units, 10 units, or 100 units? We have used multifamily with a broad brush with no definition, so it can be all of the above. But the average person is thinking 2 units, and developers are like, wow, 100 units. I think it's great to have apartments in the business zone. That was the best thing out of the plan. It's been in our past plans, but it should be a mixed-use model, not just apartment complex in the business zone. There are proven to be compatible uses, but they still need adequate parking. They don't typically reduce parking in those mixed-use zones. I think parking should be only reduced around the train station. That's the transit-oriented district. I just don't see apartments in the industrial zones. Maybe in the industrial park based on the industries presently there, but because they're typically not compatible uses. They can operate 24 hours, have noise, smells, trucks, all a problem within residential housing. Typically, there's already buffers between residential and industrial. I never saw the discuss of these issues that came up on the pages in the plan from the committee. The state wants us to have more affordable housing. Yes, we already have done that from our last plan to this plan, and from last year to this year. I also looked at East Hartford's plan, Suffield's, and Vernon's, all approved last year. Right in East Hartford, it talks about the state wants the town to increase the number of affordable housing units going forward, allowing the towns to create their own plans, but the word to remember is increase. And Enfield has increased ours with all the approved apartments in the queue. Why isn't that on the charts? East Hartford also talks about the elderly and having places for them to downsize. Enfield's POC doesn't mention elderly in any of our housing options at all. East Hartford's plan also talks about mixed uses in the business zone, which is good, but they don't talk about apartments in the industrial zone. The reason is typically it costs more to have residential versus industrial. These two towns didn't have a problem with OPM accepting their POCD. They did this last year. Let's talk about the maps in the book. All the maps have to be full page. Our past plans had full page maps. We need to see what's on the maps and not need a magnifying glass to read it. The open space map and the maps need to be updated and sourced where the information has come from. Page 85 has a special development at the prisons. What exactly is this? Most of the land that has been preserved for the birds in 2000. Because we don't have any updated maps, the new people don't have the history, so they don't know. There's something to be said about history. So why have a new zone at the prison? Is it for the birds? I have more, but I'll come back.
Thank you. Karen?
We really should just let people finish. Provide incentives, Karen LaPlante, 166 North Maple Street. Page 52, provide incentives to overcome the high cost of redevelopment. For multifamily rehabilitation projects, we should consider a pilot program that will assist with the removal of lead, asbestos, and mold in our older homes. lead, asbestos, and other building materials thought to be safe in the past have now created an added cost to these buildings becoming safe and usable again. We can watch as our children and occupants suffer from poor environmental quality, or we can provide incentives to remove these contaminants from these homes. Maybe this could be a revolving fund or a loan forgiveness program that encourages the reuse of existing homes. By not putting our citizens and children in danger of these known environmental hazards, we will avoid a multitude of future health issues caused by these contaminants. The 2011 POCD, page 195, table 46, there is a needs analysis for our publicly owned recreation facilities that talks about our need for certain park types and acreage. Based on our population, I think it was based on 45,000 at the time, the ideal park acreage was recommended to be about 735 acres. At that time, the current park acreage was just over 465 acres. We have not had substantial increase in park acreage in the past 11 years, as recommended in our last POCD. Parks, open space, hiking, and biking trails are all important parts of the character of the community and have continually ranked high on the list of priorities in town surveys. At this point, we do not know the status of our acreage of open spaces and parks. Based upon the goals of this plan of preserving 21% of the town as open space, and that's the state goal throughout the state, that means we should be preserving about 4,600 acres. 4,600 acres, 4,600 acres. We are nowhere near that goal. I urge this town council to put a priority on protecting our natural resources, our public land, and securing more open space. Provide the Conservation Commission the resources to update our open space and natural resource inventory. This is a plan of conservation and development. Maybe just once we can concentrate a little more on the conservation side of this plan. I had a couple more thoughts while sitting down there, and bad mistake making me come back, because now I can say more things. The data that where the data comes from, I think it's important to put that in the document, either footnoted at the back, document where the data comes from and what it includes. Like in the apartments, did these numbers include the Chapman apartments on North Maple Street, which were somewhere between 300 and 500 units? Looking forward to the next plan, proper documentation from this starting point will be much easier for staff and the next steering committee if we have that documentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Back to, let's see. Angela, did you need to come back up?
Let's see, let me continue. Angela Foss, 16 Crescent Beach Drive. Page 31, in regards to wetlands, I hope that all involved will focus on the protection of wetlands. Once wetlands are destroyed, they are destroyed. The idea of recreating or enhancing wetlands is just a play on words. Protection of wetlands is key. Maps. The detailed aquifer protection maps should include all the wells that either the Hazardville Water Company and Connecticut Water Company own, and show where these wells that we drink from across the town of Enfield are located. Complete map of open space is necessary. I don't see the open space behind the houses on Lake Drive, which was given to the town as part of the building requirement of the Spruce Land development. And I'm sure there are many more missing here. I've attended meetings, whether either the planning or zoning members or the town council members have asked for a complete map of the open spaces of the town of Enfield. Are these spaces documented on a map? Is that why they're maybe not included in this? I don't know. If so, this map should be included in this plan. If not, it should be created and updated with all the changes as they occur. Housing and housing need. There are styles of housing that work well in North Carolina, which is growing by leaps and bounds. They are called patio homes. A development of patio homes would be a huge improvement in the old-fashioned multi-home structure. Each family can have their own home on a very reasonable price, and just like condominium communities, the lawns, the driveways, and exterior are cared for by others, but the lots are very tiny. My brother lives in one of these. This would be an extremely profitable position for a developer. Let's be forward-thinking, not backward-thinking. We should also dream big. Let's attract builders of larger-sized single-family homes, similar to those in Summers, Suffield, and Long Meadow. If you build it, they will come. I can envision areas like Salerno Drive off of Broadbrook Road. Why are we comparing ourselves to Greater Hartford and the whole state of Connecticut? Especially repeatedly, but not to our surrounding towns. Have you looked at the same numbers in Summers and Suffield and East Long Meadow? They are booming, and they're adding to their grand list by adding lovely, larger homes. These tables need to be completed, including comparable data from comparable towns. Do we aspire to become Hartford? I do not believe our residents would welcome this, and neither should you or the writers of this document. Table 9 on page 48 shows just what I'm stating. People with greater incomes will move to Enfield if more of these types of properties were built. The top 3 income tiers in this existing housing stock chart that you have in this BOCD are lacking in a total of 4,620 homes. You want me to come back? I'll come back.
Anne Marie, if you want to back up.
Anne Marie Galdenzi, 1330 Enfield Street. I have a whole paragraph. I'm not going to repeat what the lady just said. It's basically, I was going to say the same thing, but comparing ourselves to Summers and Suffield. What I do want to say is that what Enfield does offer is a relatively affordable housing than our neighbors next door, and I think that Enfield should be proud of that. We give people the opportunity to start in a home in this town, and I think that's a great thing. Considering Enfield's aging population, many people have addressed that. I think we should encourage some more development, maybe some more upscale development. So the aging population that has the higher end homes, it's advantageous for them to look at some upscale aging areas, home for them. We all want affordable housing. In this current version of the POCD, it seems that it's heavily leaning on multi-dwellings to make this happen. We need to be very careful to conserve and protect the existing communities that are presented here today. The town needs to attend to and preserve all types of needs. To help with affordable housing, maybe we consider lowering the minimum size house built in Enfield. Let's define what multiple housing is. Is it a 2 or 3 family home? We should not reduce the larger multifamily density dwelling lots to 5 acres. Also, kind of not reduce the requirement of parking too. The numbers do show that Enfield does meet the housing for the average median income resident and for the residents that are lower than average income. But let's not forget there are many affordable housing projects planned in town that have been spoken about today, and we should take that into consideration when we're planning. A huge change in this book is allowing access dwelling units, ADU, page 49, but no details or guidance is given on what this is. It just says that we should allow them. It makes no reference to lot size, home size, utility hookups, effects on septic water usage, and effects on the neighborhood. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be considered, but some guidance and some descriptions should be considered and put into the book. It's not allowed in the past POCDs, and I'd like to know why. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. Mary Ellen?
Mary Ellen DeLuzio, 1330 Enfield Street, Enfield, Connecticut. And first of all, I'd like to thank you all for your patience tonight and for hearing us out. I know it's been a long road for you. I would like to reiterate what other people have said, that on page 101, I was stunned to see the reduce of special use permits and limit or cease the practice of holding public hearings on site plan applications. That's just shocking to me. I think site plans should be a right. It's the only way citizens have any kind of input into development of the town. I'm sure you're all aware of the pain and struggle the historic district residents went through when a massive scale apartment complex was proposed on a non-conforming property in the heart of the historic district. During that process, the POCD was referred to many times. All that information from the past book has been removed, therefore removing any obstructions to this project being presented again. In fact, the project's attorney stated it when presentations were made to the zoning board. I believe he said, you know, this project would pass under the new OCPD, or POCD. So why are you doing this to us? It's outrageous that our voices have not been heard and that you are blatantly ignoring the wishes of the community and changing the very cultural landscape you rightly said should be preserved. And to add to this, the reduction of lot size of multifamily houses to 5 acres allows for massive housing projects that could be done up and down Enfield Street. There are at least 5 properties in my area of the historic district that are over 5 acres. It's a huge change, and there's no explanation for it. This brings me to another point, that the historic district only gets a vague mention on page 6 and one other section in the whole book. It says that the preservation of the historic resources should remain a top priority. So we get one sentence in the POCD? How is this preserving anything? Who does it empower to make the decision about the development in this area? Again, looking at the struggle we went through for over a year to stop a massive multifamily project, the POCD book does nothing to preserve or protect the district. In the introduction, the POCD mentions Enfield is confronted with many other things, such as climate change. This statement is not backed up with any information on how Enfield is directly impacted by climate change. Yet, we are expected to spend taxpayer money implementing strategies to combat it. Expensive projects like installation of solar energy in town-owned facilities, removing zoning barriers and allow alternative energy sources to be installed in residential areas, tax incentives to properties that convert to alternative energy sources. All good ideas, but we need to know that the state push to alternative energy sources has also increased electric rates, rates that dramatically affect all of us. This has been especially hard on middle to lower class citizens who are combating inflation on top of rising energy costs. In this case, a larger window to climate change must be taken. The fact that China has built a coal-fired plant at a rate of 1 per week for years is the most dramatic effect on climate change. India, with its massive population and energy needs, is another source of greenhouse gases and climate change. The conditions under which destructive, unsafe, slave-like conditions that rare earths are mined to create storage batteries for electric cars and future electric grid are unethical, to say the least. If we want to honestly combat climate change, we do not have to strap the citizens of Enfield with the cost of solar energy, but we must fight China with its terrible energy practices. We should have at our OPCD, our POCD, ways to eliminate doing business with China and its terrible energy practices. We should have ways to eliminate it and its unethical mining practices. In addition, the proposal of increased multifamily housing that may perhaps allow high-rise apartments and allowing higher density projects will only increase our carbon footprint. It will increase the amount of impervious surface and create more stormwater runoff. This is in direct conflict with the goal of reducing climate change. Perhaps keeping the level of housing it is at now is a good thing in regard to climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there anybody else for the second time?
In a presentation, Patrick Thibodeau, 20 Cora Street. In a presentation that Dr. Poland made during the summer, he described apartment complex and multifamilies as cash cows. I know exactly what he was talking about. I was a condo board in a complex in a different city. We were 40 units. And because these units tend to be smaller, efficiencies in one bedroom and a sprinkling in a two-bedroom, there are very few children, so no additions to the school system. And people tended to be younger. In many cases, this was their first home. So we paid the same residential tax rate as anybody else over 4 floors. We didn't add to the tax base at all. We had to pay for our own garbage removal, everything. So the town made a ton of money off us. It made a ton of money off all these buildings. If you go to Middletown, and you should look at this, they have a shopping center in a very low-key area. Middletown is very low-key, very, very nice Main Street. But they have a shopping center, and right next to it, they have an approximately 12 to 13-story condominium. It's big. It's massive, right? You don't even really notice it from the street. But that building not only pays a huge amount of taxes to Middletown, it supplies people to that shopping center. So, I mean, it solves a lot of problems. We have 2 things that we need to do in our town. We need to build, we're going to have to do something with the mall. And the only way we can really fix that mall is to build multifamily housing, but also we're going to have to do some inventive things that we've never done before. Let me give you some for instances. In New Britain, I know a lot about New Britain. I lived there. I was a city hall reporter. I covered economic development. I wrote a published history book on that city. And that city was as destroyed as you can be. When our city here, Enfield, grew 30,000 people in 20 years, they shrunk 10,000 people. West Farms Mall vacuumed out the retail, and their factory collapse destroyed them. So what did they do? For instance, a lot of things. The developer wanted to build a 100,000 square foot office building, but he said he needed somebody to lease, they needed the city to lease 1/3 of it. The city did. They moved the school department in it. They sold the school department building for condominiums, but the goal was just to keep the school department in long enough to stabilize the building. After a period of years that happened, they used the school board again to renovate a building in downtown New Britain, and the school board moved there. They got Central to move a building in downtown. They took the police department, moved it in a better area downtown, took the first floor and put retail on it. They did those things one after the other. Their population is now rising. Our population is going down. They did everything they needed to do to fix that town, and they're working really hard on it. They're also getting a $1 billion hydrogen development plant in that city. What are we getting? We're losing Lego. Lego, that's 750 people. How many of those people own homes in our town? That's going to probably take a hit on our residential market in some way over some period of years. You know, we've lost Mass Mutual, we've lost Lego, we've lost Hallmark, we've lost a lot of jobs. And we're not treating this seriously. Our whole retail area is hanging on. We've lost some of our anchors. We got Costco, Home Depot, Kohl's, we lost Best Buy, and we have 3 grocery stores. But there's a lot of stuff coming down the pike that's going to be attacking these things, especially the grocery stores. It wouldn't take much. All they have to do is take 10, 15% of the retail revenue that these grocery stores get, and we could destabilize one of them. We have to recognize the problem. That's the first thing this town has to do. This town is a lot of things, but we got to be clear about it. If we don't increase our population or at least stabilize it, and if we don't figure out how we're going to fix that mall area, we're in trouble. We are in big trouble. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori Longy.
Lori Longy, 1427 Enfield Street. We should never take away the public's right to speak. Page 10. Removing public hearings or public input is just wrong. I spent years listening to the public, and you learn things that you may not know from the public, and then you can make better decisions by having more knowledge. I'm sure the public is going to tell you things that you didn't know tonight, and it's probably about the prison and the birds. On page 48, the permits are never a certain thing. If they were certain, we wouldn't need boards to hear the applications in the first place. We should all be concerned with the services of sewer, police, and fire, especially with all this new housing. It could be a high-rise, which could be 100 units, which could affect our services, police, and fire. We should be aware of these consequences before the changes are made and not after these changes are made. Hence, the town of Suffield. They did one affordable housing complex off of East Street, and they put a 4-year moratorium on the study to check the impacts, if there were any, from Brook Hill Village. It's so that they can study affordable housing and better plan for its development in Suffield. They got this plan approved last year. If they can do this type of thing, then why can't Enfield? We should consider going back to the smaller lot sizes like we had in Enfield, the R17s, the R25s. We should open up building condominiums again that are not age restricted. Look at the chart on page 48. We are lacking 4,620 units of housing of incomes over 75,000. Aren't these your workforce housing incomes? We should be trying to promote home ownership and condos for all of Enfield, not just Thompsonville. Lastly, density is always a hot button. Thompsonville is higher density, and we've already changed the zoning to allow for that. I love Enfield because it has a lot to offer. I'm a generational resident. It's got shopping, medical, restaurants, farms, entertainment, open space, but this POCD, the way it's written right now, changes Enfield too much for me, and it has too many contradictory things in it. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else? Zach?
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Zach Zanoni, 6 Howard Street, Enfield, Connecticut. I just want to take an alternative viewpoint, specifically on the note of a member spoke about the climate. My family owns and operates 130 acres of farmland here, and if you ask them, the dryers are getting drier, the wets are getting wetter, and ultimately the storms are getting stronger. So when you're asking how does climate affect Enfield, it affects our agricultural communities and it affects it adversely. That's something that demands action. And personally, I think in regards to the POCD, I think we need to be a little more aggressive in regards to that. When you're talking about here in Enfield, I think we all see it quite often. We see another application for a fast food restaurant. That's another drive-through. That's another 20 cars with emissions in our air. That's affecting your air quality. That's affecting your lungs. That's affecting what you breathe. Climate change does affect this town, especially with the level of development that we have here. I hear a lot of comments tonight about thinking about a long-term vision, and I wholly agree with that. Think about 10 years from now, a lot's going to change. I probably won't have hair the next time we have conversations about the POCD in 2032. But something I would suggest, and what's noticeably absent from this document, is something that a lot of our surrounding towns do have. And it's that if you go to a Dunkin' Donuts in Simsbury versus a Dunkin' Donuts here, you're going to notice that the signs look different. You're going to notice that the buildings look different. Well, why is that? That's because they have design review advisory committees. I would recommend that this, which is absent from the POCD, is included in the document, that our Planning and Zoning consider constructing a design review advisory committee in which we could have more control over the architectural styles here in the town of Enfield, because conformity does make an attractive community. However, I would note that with that, that does mean at the same time that we can look at multifamily housing, but ensure that how it appears is more palatable to the public. For instance, you could have a development and it could be 3 stories and it can go all the way, or it can start to recede. That can affect how it is viewed and palatable to the public. So I really think that the council should consider putting that in our recommendations there. Anything else I want to note with here to conclude? Oh, all in all, I think, again, this is a good document. I think it needs some work, and I think you have seen that ad nauseum tonight. I'm sure you're all quite exhausted. But I think overall this is heading in the good direction. You have to think about, most importantly, when you're talking about multifamily housing, is attracting the next generation. You know, people that are my age, I personally want a single-family home. You could talk to most people at UConn. They're not too keen on the idea. They don't want the maintenance. It doesn't mean it's low income. You see high-income housing being built in West Hartford. You see it in Simsbury. Rents there are $2,500 a month, a lot more than what most mortgages are for Star Ranches here in Enfield. So multifamily doesn't mean low income. So we need to really take that into consideration when discussing that. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I conclude my comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else that would like to approach?
Lori Parker, 105 Cottage. I'll just run through the things that I liked and didn't particularly like in the current document. I like the idea of the tree replacement plan, and would like to see if we have a tree map that we can look at what's already been removed or planned to be removed, and how that might work out. I disagree with abatements in general. I mean, Enfield is desirable on its own. We're centrally located. And we shift the burden to the residents, I think, when we're offering those abatements to big businesses. Page 10, talking about removing barriers to investments. I disagree with removing special permits. If anything, I think we need more. And the I-1 designation seems to be too wide open. So I would advocate for more special permits. I disagree with removing public hearings. I think the public should have more involvement. We're the ones that live here, and taking away public hearings also gives up the opportunity to intervene and be involved and call in experts and bring in your own second opinions. And I'm not so sure about allowing greater density, as we're a small town, and I don't know if we're looking to become more of a city and what we're trying to achieve. I do agree with reuse, and wonder if there is a report or a visual map of vacant buildings in town, and I think that's important to look through. The other thing on page 59 I was interested in is the term collector roads, like Moody Road, Shaker Road, Bacon Road. They're terrible already, and they're getting worse, and we keep adding more traffic to that. And also interested in the restriction on trucks on those. I guess I would referred to collector roads. And then on page 54, it states that the population is contracting, but we keep talking about more housing, and I have a question too on the multifamily housing. Is that the only answer, or are there other ways that we can meet the requirements we need to meet? Page 56, I agree with investing in amenities. Page 63, I'm not sure that I understand the proposed sewer service area maps. The existing one shows sewer lines, but then the proposed one shows light blue areas outlined, and some already have existing lines in them. And then there's a future expansion in yellow, and I didn't know how that differentiated from the proposed. Lastly, real quick, the special development. Want more information on what that designation means, and is there public input allowed on those special districts? And that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Angela?
Angela Foss, 16 Crescent Beach Drive. Just a couple things I wanted to add at the end. So on the map on page 87, many people have spoken about this, showing the land beside Crescent Lake and leading to the Shaker Road. That has been changed in this particular map. I'm not sure what the rationale is, or I'd like some forethought as to why that's been changed, but the 2011, and even as I looked on the town's map just recently, that whole section is yellow, and it's rated R88 in yellow, and now it's all part of this new special district, and we don't know anything about it. It just was like thrown at us, and we don't know what that's all about. The other thing is, it'd be nice if we could have it easier for, I know you want to streamline things for commercial development, but streamline things for people who want to build homes or developers. Because I know that when we were trying to build our house, we had lots of people who didn't even want to come to Enfield because things are so difficult to work with whatever. They were saying it's just really difficult to get things through the town of Enfield in the town itself. So if that could be something that could be added somehow to make it more friendly or streamlined for regular developing people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to come forward? Okay, I declare our public hearing over. I want to thank everybody for all of their comments, everybody that came forward and expressed their opinions on the POCD. They're greatly appreciated. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to now introduce our town planner, Lori Whitman, who will go through the steps that will get to how the POC will become or will be adopted and forwarded to the state. Thank you.
All right. Does this work? Oh, here it is. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thanks. We had a good turnout tonight, which is really nice. It's good to see the public come out, and there was a lot of thoughtful and poignant comments, and I appreciate that. This was one of the steps for adoption of the Plan of Conservation and Development. At this point, the town council has the option to act on this tonight or table your action to another evening, which my guess is probably what you're going to do. It's getting late. You have the right to reject or endorse any or all portions of the Plan of Conservation and Development, and you can submit recommendations to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Should you actually not endorse a section, the Planning and Zoning Commission may only override that by a 2/3 vote of their regular members. So that would be 5 out of 7 members would have to vote in favor of approving that section that you may have rejected or not endorsed. Moving forward, where can you find the draft POCD? It can be accessed on the Planning Department website, all the Land Use Commission websites, PZC, ZBA, Inland Wetlands, Conservation, Ag Commissions. If you so desire to have a hard copy, we are charging $10 for that just because we're running out of printing money. And let's see, so the next thing that happens now is obviously the town council will take action when they so desire, hopefully before March 23rd, which is the public hearing for the POCD from the Planning and Zoning Commission. If the public has any other suggestions, comments, please email me, lwitten@enfield.org, and I will take your comments, compile it in a list, which I've already been doing, and that will be presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if you have other written documents, please send them on to me, and I'll just put them in the pile. All right, so we have the public hearing on March 23rd. Assuming adoption occurs, then we have to then send it to the state. First, we have to put it in the town clerk's office, and then 60 days later, we send it to Office of Policy and Management for their approval. Now, subsequent to that, we are going to be working on our zoning regulations, as everybody's been talking about. And yes, we might take some of the recommendations from the Plan of Conservation and Development, but we are really trying to make our regulations fair and equitable, simple to read, reliable, and easy to use. I'm not sure if we've even discussed a starting date for that, but probably right around the time we get the POCD adopted, then we'll probably start the zoning regulations. So that's kind of it for the next steps. If if anybody has any questions, comments, town council. If you speak loud.
Just go over step 2. Your step 2, town council.
So the town council, so the town council can actually adopt the POCD. They can adopt portions of the POCD. They could do nothing. It's all up to them. So if they do actually, if they do not endorse a portion of the POCD, then in order for the Planning and Zoning Commission to approve that section, they would have to have a 5 out of 7 vote, which is a 2/3. Yes. I'm not sure if everybody heard that. As if it was rejected completely, then it still would require a 5 out of 7 votes.
What happens if the zoning board doesn't approve it with a 5 to 7, 5 to 2 vote? The town council doesn't approve it, planning and zoning doesn't approve it, then what happens?
Well, I guess at that point it is rejected and we have to go back and kind of rework it because we must have one. Otherwise, we will not have any discretionary funding for any grants. Through the chair, the council.
Well, at this point in time, we will take all of your recommendations. We will meet as a council. We will discuss. We will make amendments. We will forward them to town planner and the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we will move forward with that. But we will take everything that was taken into consideration of what you stated here tonight.
Okay.
All right. We will discuss. We will meet. Our next council meeting is March 6th, and we will have discussions throughout to make amendments. Okay. So, does anybody else have any questions or comments? Before do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Councilor Despard and Councilor Mangini. All in favor? Unanimous? Thank you very much.